My next guest is Han Hageman. Hans is a graduate of Princeton and Columbia University Law School. He has started and led organizations for underserved children in Harlem, New York, Kenya, and Lucknow, India. He is a recipient of the Robin Hood Foundation Heroes Award and the Essence Magazine Award. He is currently the executive director of the Tutwiler Community Education Center, a community and youth development organization located in the Mississippi Delta. His middle school and high school students learned the educational and healing power of nature on service trips to places like Nicaragua and Senegal, where they helped build a vegetable garden for AIDS patients. His goal is to be an ancestor worth remembering. Welcome to the podcast, Hans.
Thrilled to be here, Dana. Thank you for having me.
Well, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
This may be a little dramatic for
Mm.
some of the listeners, but it was several years ago when I had started my independent middle school, and my brother and I were in our, I guess that's actually our first year there in East Harlem, in the community where we had grown up. And we knew that the task was going to be hard. We had to raise
Mm-hmm.
money. We got our initial funding from a professional gambler, half of it, and the other half
Oh,
from
wow.
JFK Jr.
Uh-huh.
And so that there was finding staff. It was an independent school. It predated charter school legislation in New York, so it was all kind of a first impression. And as if the challenges of running a school from the ground up was not hard enough, this was also the time in New York City where the crack epidemic was at its peak. And the year we started, there were approximately 2,400 homicides in New York, most of those drug related. And the kind of community we lived in was one of the epicenters for that. And we had what we thought was a reasonable policy that we would not allow drug dealing in front of the school. Apparently, that annoyed the family that was actually running the traffic in the surrounding blocks, and so they took out a contract on my life and my brother's life. And um there were several difficult weeks where I wasn't sure I was going to be able to go home to see my then infant daughter. um there were times that I would sit in the office late at night, uh frankly, a couple of times in tears. Not, all I wanted to do was run a school. And a few things happened. One is the police department was very responsive and they offered 24-hour protection, which I declined, but they also
Mm-hmm.
accelerated my ability to get a carry permit for a handgun, which we had a school meeting. The families were in agreement that we needed to protect ourselves and the kids. Um, Several other community people put the word out that they would look after us, and that this could no longer go on. And then one evening, in a community that was mainly Hispanic and Black, I saw a white guy at the door at the gate buzzing. And I came up to him and he said, we said, what do you want? And he said, well, I have a delivery. He says, I got this package from this man. He told me to find you, Hans, and to give this to you.
Okay.
And what it was a wrapped up statue of Saint Michael slaying the dragon.
Hmm.
And he says, I don't know what this means. I don't know who gave it, but this is for you. I took it. It was symbolic. I thought I had no idea what it was about. But several
Hmm.
weeks later, the family that was running the drug trafficking on the block asked for a meeting, and they asked us what did we want, and we gave them our very simple instructions: no more drug dealing in front of the block. They adhered to it, and we
Wow.
were then able to run our school very successfully. In the school 32 years later now, my brother's still running it, but it was up there. But it was an existential point, for what I thought was a very simple kind of setting.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, especially with a lot of these things just happening right outside the school where you're trying to keep kids safe, and like you said, finding ways to um, know like kids were able to get the education they needed without being in fear, right? And so you found those ways, and then this guy, did you ever find out why or who'd given him the statue? They.
It was very, very mysterious. I attribute it to, what you can call it, whatever, supernatural, spiritual,
Sure.
whatever kinds of forces. I don't think it was a coincidence. And I I wish I still had that statue, and
Uh-huh.
it disappeared in a move. And but there were several points along that path where I saw people, despite the fear, despite the danger,
Yeah.
I also saw people coming out to support and help us strengthen our mission.
Hmm. Hmm. So, let's go back a little bit from the time that you opened this school to when you were a student yourself, and tell me about who or what were your most important teachers growing up.
First and foremost were my parents, who
Hmm.
they essentially ended up working themselves to death in service to other people who didn't necessarily, and my parents came from very humble backgrounds. My mother was a black woman from Chicago. Her family had come
Hmm.
up in the northern migration from the South, uh, one of, I think, 12 kids. My father was a white man from Nebraska, a farming community in Nebraska, and they met
Hmm.
together in Chicago. And we ended up coming east, and my father started a residential drug treatment center. And I
Hmm.
saw how hard he worked to give people a second chance in that work, and I saw how hard my mother worked, and we lived in that residential drug treatment center, so it wasn't like a 9 to 5, and
Hmm.
so through their example, we got to see how things work. Then there was George Mitchell, my fifth grade teacher, who everybody thought he was really mean, and at times I
Hmm.
guess he was. Um, but he was somebody who was very rigorous and demanded rigor from us in terms of in fifth grade, how we thought, how we acted, how we moved through life. And we eventually, I got the backstory that he had been in World War II. A fighter pilot had been shot down, captured by the Nazis, and his body weight went down to 82 pounds, but he came out obviously and survived. And he had a different opinion as to how one should move through life and what virtues one should take. So there was that. There was a guy named Joe D'Angelo, who I'm still in touch with, who
Hmm.
was my English teacher and also my karate instructor. A very generous, tough, giving man, who showed me a lot. So my parents, people like that, those were some of the teachers that I had growing up, and others throughout my career and in college, who I was fortunate to come across, like the dean of the Princeton Chapel, Ernest Gordon,
Hmm.
who, when I was talking with him about the then apartheid government in South Africa and the university's investments in them and what the appropriate response of the student body should be, he was very clear in his counsel as to what the right thing to do was. And learning about Dean Ernest Gordon's background, he had been an atheist before joining the Scottish Highlanders during World War II. And he was captured, taken prisoner by the Japanese. And there's a movie called The Bridge Over the River Kwai. Well, he was in the prison camp that was, I guess, popularized by that movie. He was left for dead, but then had a spiritual awakening where he actually found God and moved from the atheist to eventually the dean of the Princeton Chapel. But he was
Wow.
also a mentor and a guide and somebody I looked to during the college years, as was another guy who was head of students, well, head of uh, number two of security at Princeton, a guy named Al Terry, African American guy, former Marine,
Mhm.
who supported me throughout my 4 years in school in a number of ways. So those are just some of the people.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and it seems like just learning that work ethic from your parents and from these teachers that you had during your school and your college education led you to be prepared for, like you said, the trench story of opening this school and running it from the ground up in a challenging area. So yeah, it goes back to like the people that help shape us. So
No,
let's talk.
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
let's talk a little bit about one of your mottos. It's time under bliss. So, how can somebody achieve time under bliss?
There are a lot of ways. First, I think, what is it, Carl Jung, who I
Yeah.
who I like, the psychiatrist, psychologist, So the world will ask who you are, and if you don't know, the world
Mhm.
will tell you. And so some of it is being able to take a step back
Mhm.
and thinking about your one's life purpose,
Yeah.
and why are we here? And a lot of people never question why we're here. They'll get the credentials, they'll move into the job, and then they'll put their heads down, and the next thing they know, they looked up and they're like, what was I doing? What was this all about? Um, so I think it's important to be clear about life purpose, uh, in order to attain bliss or joy rather than happiness. And I make that
Mhm.
distinction. Is to be clear about one's most important virtues. What are the or what are the things that are most important to you? So for me, it's things like freedom, creativity, service. Um, those are some of the things that I try to move towards. The virtues that I like to believe underpin my work and have for most of my professional life are things like self-mastery, wisdom, courage, and love. And so being clear about why we do what we do and why we are here to do them. And then to be even more specific, um, some people might have heard the term SMART goals.
Mhm.
So setting goals, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time bound. I prefer to think of goals as well formed outcomes, and so you're adding some more layers on. How will you know you've achieved that outcome? What will it look
Mhm.
like? What will you see? Who will be around you? What's the context? What resources are needed? And is it in fact a desirable goal? What is it moving you towards? um, creating things like morning routines, um, not just jumping into the day because we get hijacked by things that appear urgent but might not necessarily be important. But if we have a morning routine of movement, breath, meditation, for some people, proper nutrition, but hydration, that's really important. One of the things that I still work at after all these years is establishing appropriate boundaries and
Mhm.
figuring out, not necessarily balance in my life, because I used to hear you have to have balance, and for some
Mhm.
people I guess that's fine. For me, it's more about harmony. In terms of balance, I don't think that if something's happening at work, that if I put more into that all of a sudden detracts from my personal life or my home life. I like to think that those things can harmonize, and I think for the most part, I've been successful in that. So thinking about life in terms of harmony, or again, for some people, balance. The
Mhm.
boundaries, going back to that, it's like who's around you.
Yeah.
I can't remember who said that you're the sum of the five people that you spend the most time with,
Yeah.
and thinking about who is in that circle, and there may be several circles. Who are those, the closest people to you? Why are they in your life? What are they bringing to it? What are you bringing to their life? And then there are acquaintances as that circle moves out, and then there's some people who have made it to your circle, but why are they there? And a lot of times we don't reflect on that kind of reflection, and as well as part of perhaps a morning practice, but should be part of a daily practice, in my opinion, is some form of breath work or mindfulness practice.
Mhm.
And so I've done both. I'm certified in both. I've used those as tools with people that I've worked with, whether it's staff or the young people that I've chosen to work with. Staying physically active is incredibly important. And so even if it's just a 5 minute mobility routine. And if you Google 5 minute mobility on YouTube,
Mhm.
you'll
Mhm.
find plenty of really good routines, to get your body moving, to get your body out of the default position that so many of us find ourselves in by being in front of a desk, or hunched over a computer. That kind of thing is important. Fostering social connections. It goes back to the circle, but it also goes back to being able to network and establishing relationships and staying in touch with people. Again, something that I I, I wish somebody had told me about earlier on. Prioritizing nutrition and hydration. Most of us are dehydrated. Most of us are not well nourished. We're overnourished. Sleep is in many respects even more critical, and being able to establish a sleep routine. And there are ways of doing that, and that's important as part of our relaxation or stress reduction, and being in touch with our nervous system. Having hobbies, outside of work is really important. And then figuring out whether it's on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, for some people it can be even a daily basis. Figuring out if the routines that you're engaging, well, first of all, do you have routines? And then is
Mhm.
the habit and practices that you're engaging in, are they serving you? And then
Mhm.
making adjustments. And then on a daily basis, there's the acronym WIN, and that's
Mhm.
what's important now, because a lot of people will try to push things on your agenda,
Mhm.
and they don't necessarily need to be there right then. So what's
Mhm.
important now, and being consistent in all those things.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think like you're talking about, these are many things that I hear a lot of effective leaders talk about, like having these things in your life, and focusing on, the whole person, right? Rather than just what you're doing in
Yes.
your job, right? If you don't practice these things, it's a recipe for burnout. So,
Right.
knowing that, yeah, you can achieve time under bliss by doing these things, and working on yourself, being that person who's takes this time for the self care. I wanted to talk also about heart centered leadership. You talk about like the benefits of vulnerability and trust in heart centered leadership. So, what's your definition of being a heart centered leader?
Being a heart-centered leader, some people will say it's being empathic. I prefer to think of it as being someone who is in fact compassionate, someone
Hmm.
who is able to move from the mind into the heart, and there's so many connections going from the heart and the gut to the brain, versus the reverse. And a lot of people don't realize that. But it's when in a job context, do you care about the people you are working with, managing, leading? Do you care about
Yeah.
them personally? And being able to show that, and at the same time being able to challenge them when things are not going well, to have those kinds of honest conversations. And if you're not willing to have those honest conversations, then you're more manipulative, than and you're either uncaring or you're
Yeah.
manipulative. But if you combine the two in terms of showing compassion and understanding and curiosity about people's personal individual lives and existences, and then also being able to directly challenge them when things aren't working the way they're supposed to be working, I think that shows that's an extension of that additional care that's important in being a heart-centered leader.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, like you said, showing that you care, not only like being somebody who is taking care of their staff by maybe, doing donuts every Friday or something, but really having those personal conversations with staff members. I think there's a lot of principals at middle and high schools. They feel like, we have 90 to 130 staff members. But I think you can also delegate that amongst your admin team, and really show like staff is your priority, because that trickles down to the students.
And the message needs to be deliberate and stated,
Mhm.
and not just assumed. But yes, also through one's actions, people will be able to pick that up, and you can make it a priority in a leadership position. And
Mhm.
in fact, whether it's a school or even in a startup tech company, the value of most tech companies is a direct reflection of the founder's personal development. And the
Yeah.
more personally developed and emotionally intelligent the founder is, the higher the value of that startup company will be, and the more resilient it will be. And the same thing will hold true in the halls of a school.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I like that analogy. Because you see a lot of those tech companies that don't last, and it's also often due to poor leadership. So I thought it was interesting, like when we were talking about your story of working in New York, and now you're in the Mississippi Delta. So how did somebody who grew up and worked for a period of time in Harlem end up where you're at now? Tell me about that story of getting to the space that you're in, working with these youngsters and helping them on in service trips.
Yeah, well, I also in the Mississippi Delta, I'm working with older people, or well, they say they're senior citizens, older people. I just got my Medicare card last week, so I get to hold that up whenever I have those discussions, those hard discussions. But so I'm a big believer in post traumatic growth, and I also have been taught directly or otherwise that you only fail when you stop trying. And my being in the Mississippi Delta, I never, and I think I've actually had conversations with myself saying, and probably with other people, the last place I would ever move to would be the state of Mississippi, much less the Mississippi Delta. However, in February 2022, there was a knock on my door at about 7 in the morning as I was drinking my coffee, getting ready to start my day. And some heavyset guy with tattoos was there, and he said, "Can I help you?" He says, "I got a delivery for you." And I opened the door, and he handed it to me. He says, "Don't get mad. It's just my job." And apparently well, what happened was my wife had filed for a divorce after 20 plus years. And so the way I work, and I know it's not for everybody, but the way I'd been taught to work was that you then ask yourself, so now what? And what are you making lemonade out of lemons and all that kind of thing. But that's how my mind has been trained to work. And so I put it out, and I, maybe not religious, but spiritual. My father was a Methodist minister, but I think I'm more spiritual than religious. I asked the universe and God for what needed to be my next steps. And I looked at a few things. I was a finalist for a position to run a school in Colorado, but they chose somebody 20 years younger who had all kinds of credentials from the state of Colorado, and so I get it, but I was one of two in the national search for that position. And so then I said, let me take a step back, and maybe, and I don't even know what search, because the place that where I've now ended up, I don't think they did a national search, so I don't know how it came across my radar. But the Tutwiler Community Education Center was started by some nuns who, one nun who had been unable to walk, I think because of rheumatoid arthritis or something, but she was wheelchair bound until she found, I think the father of American, not orthopedics, but not chiropractic. I'm blanking on the medical term, but he essentially cured her, and she was able to walk. Osteopathy, actually, and John Upledger, I think was his name. And she decided that she, at the age of 40 something, was going to go to medical school so that she could create that kind of miracle in other people's lives. So she did that. She had become a nun, went to medical school, and then wrote to what she, through her research, found were the poorest communities in the United States. And only one answered. And that was the mayor of Tutwiler, Mississippi, in the Mississippi Delta. So she came down there, started a medical clinic. Eventually, a couple of other nuns joined her, and they started this community center that I now run. In 1992, 60 Minutes, the news show, did a story on them, which got them a lot of funding to build the current facility that I work in and run. And the nuns eventually retired, died, moved on, and the center had fallen on some hard times, and they were looking for a new executive director. And their search, the candidates that they had were all from Mississippi. And so I don't know how they found me. I don't know how I found them. But I eventually got offered the position. I've been down here for 4 months now, and I work with youth. I'm collaborating to the best of my ability with schools. I mean, this is a place where in Mississippi, which is recognized as having probably the poorest school system, least effective school system in the country. The schools that I work with in Mississippi are rated D and F by Mississippi, so that says something there. The poverty rate in the United States is roughly 12%. In the areas I work in, it's 3 to 4 times that. It's got the shortest lifespan in the United States. least educated population, and on and on and on. And so I work with young people to who nobody's taught them to dream. When agriculture became mechanized, a lot of jobs left. Kids decide that the big time for them is to go to a place like Memphis and work in a fast food restaurant, or an Amazon warehouse, and just to get away from Tutwiler, where I work. So my goal is to help these kids learn how to dream, uh,
Mhm.
understanding that, you know what, you're young, you may want to go to the big city, but Tutwiler will eventually become a place where they'll want to come back to raise families, to have a
Mhm.
quieter style of life, to celebrate what is in fact known as the home of the blues. And so there are a lot of challenges involved in that, but it feels like everything I've done to this point has kind of led me to this time in my life, to this place. I really enjoy being here. The people are kind. I think they're curious. They want to see if this thing is going to happen. And they also know that if I'm not successful and the center is not successful, that it's going to be a short period of time before the town dies. There are a lot of small towns in the Mississippi Delta that are on the verge of collapse or disintegration. And so I'm hoping that Tutwiler can be a shining example of what's possible when people work together in community. So we've got a lot of projects, things with drones, community vegetable gardens, some other things in the works, that
Okay.
we're trying to do with young people, and we're looking forward to collaborating with the school system and the local leaders.
Mhm. 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 Yeah, it seems like you have a lot of things planned, and you're kind of in that process of seeing what works, and getting interest in maybe more funding, like you said, because the more interest, the more students who are involved, and more community members who are donating, the more likely it is to succeed. So I wish you the best, and like you said, I
Right.
think, yeah, you hit it on the nail that you are probably prepared all these positions that you've had in the past, and growing up, and the students you worked with in New York City prepared you for this job. And it's just kind of those things that come across, right? You don't know how they found you, how you found
Absolutely.
them.
That's right. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
So I wanted to talk about emotional intelligence. That's something that we speak a lot about in terms of hiring staff, maybe conflicts with colleagues. But how is emotional intelligence important when you're leading teams and you're driving success, and fostering a positive work environment, kind of in your current context? How is emotional intelligence your driver?
Well, part of the thing that I've tried to do here is get everybody centered around a central, important, common vision that we all want to work towards, and then it's also modeling appropriate communication. And some of it goes back to being able to be candid while at the same time be caring.
Okay.
And in the setting that I'm in, and also settings I've worked in, and with boards of directors and so forth, there's often, and I am reluctant to use some of the terms that now get thrown around, but sometimes they're appropriate. Patriarchal systems that foster this top down method of leadership, where all voices are not respected, and there are situations and there are times where there has to be one voice that makes a final decision. But up
Mhm.
until that point, the ability to honor and respect, and give people the confidence that their voice and opinion and feelings on the matter are in fact respected, that they in fact will be heard, and looking at different decision making models. And so sometimes people want to do consensus, or some other things. It's being flexible in terms of how things get decided. I've used restorative circle work in different settings, where again, people are visibly able to see that everyone's voice is in fact being respected, where everybody does get a turn to voice their opinions. I was in a small piece, I with my administrative coordinator and another staff person, there's something I'm trying to get done, a delivery of a significant piece of equipment, and the administrative coordinator was supposed to follow up on it. She hadn't, and um, we needed to work through that at a much slower pace than a lot of people would otherwise have worked through it, only to let her know that the conversation was going to be respectful, that we did have an
Mhm.
important outcome, figure out that the outcome was not important just for me as the boss, but for her as well, and for the overall good of the organization. Um, and then the conversation was tense, and she admitted that she felt tension during the conversation, but she also said it's because in the past I didn't know if there was going to be some form of verbal punishment or whatever else. And when that didn't happen, I realized we were just having a hard conversation. So
Mhm.
it's trust is a big part of that.
Yeah.
So if people have a bigger vision, if people are able to trust one another, if people have a common vocabulary, and if the people who are managing or leading are willing to try different things to achieve that vision, I think a lot of good things can happen.
Yeah, and a lot of those things, like you're talking about, restorative circles, giving people a turn to try those decision making models. A lot of those things go a long way in schools of any size. And I think like really having that empathy for those people you're working with, and respecting their needs and wants. You might not be able to please everybody, right? But yeah, instilling that culture of trust is very important. Out of everything we talked about in terms of your background, your people that you've learned from along the way, and your trench story in opening the school those many years ago, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
My goal, and it's in my email signature, is to, and
Mhm.
I use two different versions, is to become an ancestor worth claiming or to become an ancestor
Mhm.
worth remembering. And perhaps it's because I've gotten to the age that I've gotten to,
Yeah.
that it's become just that simple for me. But having that phrase as kind of my north star,
Mhm.
and I would suggest that other people might want to try it regardless of whatever age they are. Um, helps to guide a lot of my decisions. But also, I would ask that if people just thought about the concept of being grounded in all your actions in wisdom, self mastery, courage, and love,
Mhm.
a lot of the other things will get taken care of.
Mhm. 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 Yeah, I think that's so important, and to think about like that ancestor piece, like how what are you leaving for future generations? Where can people connect with you and find you online?
I'd love for people to go to my organization's homepage for one thing, and that's uh, Tutwiler Community Education Center.org. And there's also a little booklet that I have if people would want on resilience, because resilience and resiliency is something that's incredibly important, and something that I work with all of my students, including kids who I've worked with in a maximum security prison where I taught vegetable gardening and breath work. I also taught them about resilience. And so if people were to go to coachhans.ck.page, so
Mhm.
COACHHANS.ck.page, there's a booklet that they can get on resilience and some of the lessons I've learned there. But start first at my organization's website. I'm amazed at the number of people who have not known anything about the Mississippi Delta or some of
Mhm.
the good work that's happening down here. And so this would be a way to get them started.
Great, great. Well, and you're also on social media as well. Where can people find you on social media?
On Twitter, I'm at Hans Hageman. On Instagram, my whatever it's called is Ronin for Life, ROIN for Life. And Facebook under my name. And also the Tutwiler Community Education Center has a Facebook page as well. And I think I got all of them. And LinkedIn again under my name, Hans Hageman.
Great, great. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast today and learning about your trench story and what you've done throughout your career to make a difference in the lives of young people and people who've gone through trauma and have hardships in life to make things better for them. Thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Dana. Appreciate it.